A temporary moment of stability seemed evident across Eurasia. German forces were able to secure a peace with the Rada and Bolsheviks. The exception was again in the Caucasus, but this time in the South Slopes. During the Great War, Russian imperial forces had made steady advances into Ottoman-controlled Anatolia. However, with the Brest-Litovsk peace settlement, a withdrawal of Russian Bolshevik forces became inevitable. This left Armenians vulnerable to Ottoman occupation, which was only alleviated with the repulsion of Turkish forces from Yerevan. The disarray in the Caucasus left a bitter taste for the Bolshevik leadership, as the Transcaucasian Federation was on the verge of secession. As a result, Red Army units captured Vladikavkaz and Grozny, thus setting up the Terek People's Soviet Republic as a countermeasure. To the west, the power vacuum in Ukraine also propelled the German army to invade and reinstall the Rada to power, although they would replace the Rada with a puppet state just a month later. By the end of the war, Kiev would switch hands over 7 times. Central Asia provided much more positive news for the Bolsheviks, as they defeated a Russian army council in Kazan and were able to set up a Soviet republic in Turkestan. This momentum was significantly challenged by a lack of Soviet control in Siberia, 2 British interventions, and a failed military campaign to replace the Emir of Bukhara. Recently freed Czechoslovakians were also pouring into the vital transportation arteries of Siberia with the intention of reaching Vladivostok in order to join the Entente in the Western Front. This caused frequent clashes that would endanger Bolshevik rule in Central Asia. However, southwestern Russia and the Caucasus continued to pose the biggest challenges to Soviet rule. Given the continuous revolts in Azerbaijan and the white advances under the new command of General Anton Denikin, massacres and interethnic conflict finally led to the declaration of Georgian independence and the fracture of the Transcaucasian Federation. And in Azerbaijan, there was a rift between the Baku Commune and a new alternative Muslim government centered in Ganja. British-backed Dashnaks, socialist revolutionaries, and Mensheviks also staged a coup d'etat against the Baku Commune in late July, thus removing the Bolsheviks from power in the southern Caucasus. Ottoman forces even reached Baku, where they proceeded to massacre thousands of Armenians as a retaliatory measure for past ills. The region was now a melange of de facto independent governments, all vying for power. Armenia, Georgia, Baku, Ganja, a Karabakh Council, the Soviet dependencies, and even the Ottomans, although they withdrew shortly afterward. In the east, the situation was completely decentralized. The Whites and Bolsheviks often allied with local factions with state boundaries in constant flux. The main anti-Bolshevik participants in the summer of 1918 were the People's Army of Komuch and the Provisional Siberian Government. Although attaining a victory at Kazan, the Whites remained bitter rivals and failed to reach an accord to re-establish the usurped Russian Provisional Government. As a result, Bolshevik-aligned groups were able to recapture Kazan and pushed elsewhere along the Volga. November of 1918 marked a period where the Civil War's belligerents started to attain some cohesion. French troops had begun landing in Crimea, and on the 3rd of November, an anti-Bolshevik all-Russian provisional government was established in Omsk. It was soon replaced by a military dictatorship under the famed Admiral Alexander Kolchak. All throughout the front, word quickly spread of an armistice between the Central Powers and the Entente. This allowed the Bolshevik government to quickly recant their obligations to the treaties with the Central Powers. They quickly advanced into Ukraine in order to set up a Soviet government. The Ottoman withdrawal from the Caucasus also encouraged them to set up several autonomous republics in the northern slopes in order to appease local ethnic groups. This would provide a mixed picture, as Georgia would end up having a brief war with neighboring Armenia. In the chaos of the south and the east came an eerie silence surrounding the periphery in the north. During the World War, Germany came to occupy much of the Baltic, and as a result of the November armistice, started withdrawing. Given the extent of the German occupation, this left the largest power vacuum to date, with the Soviets occupying much of Lithuania and setting up a government. The German puppet government in Ukraine also fell as the Rada was reformed under Volodymyr Vinnychenko. By early 1919, the situation for the Whites had improved a lot. From a ragtag army of just 3,000 men, Denikin was making headway toward the Urals with a very real possibility of linking up with Kolchak's provisional government. The Polish-Soviet War also flared up, further frustrating Soviet efforts in Belorussia. Here, the Bolsheviks attempted to set up a Lithuanian-Belarussian Soviet Republic reminiscent of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. However, Polish attacks quickly determined its short lifespan. But not all was well for the Whites. Nestor Manco's anarchist Black Army joined forces with the Soviets and constantly harassed Denikin's supply lines. Ukraine had again fallen to the Bolsheviks, and the Bashkir cavalrymen defected to the Bolsheviks due to promises of autonomy. It seemed Denikin was left little choice but to start a major offensive into the heart of the beast, Moscow. This offensive would begin in the summer along the Samara-Kursk axis, with southern white forces splitting up into two major battle groups, with one under the command of Pyotr Wrangel. With some success, the offensive pressed onto Ukraine and the Upper Don region. In conjunction, the Soviets were also pushed out of Minsk and Lithuania, now being threatened by General Yudenich's army in Estonia. Denikin's offensive was met with hostility not only from the Soviets, but from the Ukrainian nationalists as well. This created a three-sided conflict as the Black Army started to increase its harassment operations.